My name is Bob Newton. I'm the special assistant to Father Leahy, who's the president of Boston College, and I'm also acting director of the Church in the 21st Century Center, the sponsor of this event. So welcome to this evening's presentation by Archbishop Thomas Wenski. Archbishop Wenski is a native Floridian whose education and ministry has focused almost completely on the Sunshine State. He earned his Bachelor of Arts degree and his Bachelor of Arts in Philosophy and Master of Divinity from Boynton Beach Seminary, and in 1993 a master's degree in sociology from Fordham University. It's hard to imagine, when I read his bio in the last few days, it's hard to imagine a speaker in our campus program this semester who brings more to this semester's theme: the poor, what Jesus preached, and what the church teaches. In his ministry, he's been director of the Haitian Catholic Center of Miami. He's been pastor concurrently of 3 Haitian mission parishes in the Archdiocese of Miami. He's been a circuit-riding minister who established Haitian Catholic communities throughout Florida. He's been director of the Archdiocese of Miami Ministry to Non-Hispanic Ethnic Groups. He's been director of the Archdiocesan Catholic Charities, one of the largest Catholic social service agencies in the United States, where he helped forge a collaborative relationship with Caritas Cuba, the social service arm of the Catholic Church in Cuba. He's the organizer of relief efforts to Caritas Cuba for the people left homeless by Hurricane Lily, and similar efforts directed to Haiti, the Dominican Republic, the countries of Central America, and Colombia. He's been chair of the Catholic Legal Immigration Network, chair of the United States Catholic Conference of Bishops' Committee on Migration, and chair of the conference's Committee on International Policy. His work led him in these chairmanships, led him to the Congo, to the Great Lakes regions of Africa, to the Caribbean, to Central and South America, as well as to Israel and the West Bank and the Palestinian Authority. In 2010, Pope Benedict XVI appointed him the 4th Archbishop of Miami and Metropolitan of the province of Miami, which includes the 7 dioceses of the state of Florida. In addition to English, Archbishop Wenski speaks Haitian, Creole, and Spanish fluently, and preaches and celebrates Mass regularly in both languages. He is the only Florida native serving as a bishop in Florida. The Archbishop's episcopal motto is Omnia Omnibus, which for this audience I obviously don't have to translate, but there's some students in the back, which means all things to all men. It's a scriptural text taken from Paul's letter to the Corinthians. I have become all things to all men to save at least some. Please join me in welcoming the Most Reverend Thomas Wenski, Archbishop of Miami, who will speak on I Was a Stranger and You Welcomed Me, a Catholic Vision for Immigration Reform.
Thank you. And I guess I'll start with the Pope. That's a safe place to start because, after all, he's a Jesuit and he's very popular. But Pope Francis said, all Christians must recognize Jesus Christ in migrants and refugees and welcome them with respect and solidarity while avoiding suspicion and prejudice. And he continues, the mission of the Church, herself a pilgrim in the world and the mother of all, is thus to love Jesus Christ, to adore and love him, particularly in the poorest and most abandoned. Among these are certainly migrants and refugees who are trying to escape difficult living conditions and dangers of every kind. And this is a statement that is taken from his message for the World Day of Migrants and Refugees that was just released on September 23rd. But go back to the first Pope, St. Peter. In Acts chapter 10, verses 34-35, St. Peter says, "In truth, I see that God shows no partiality. Rather, in every nation, whoever fears him and acts uprightly is acceptable to him." God shows no partiality, but sometimes we do. We like our own kind, and we mistrust or are suspicious of the one whom we see as the stranger. Diversity, rather than being seen as a gift, is often feared and sometimes blamed for the discord that divides the human family. But what divides us is not our diversity. After all, God made us the way we are, with all the richnesses of our languages and ethnicities, and everything that God made, he made good. So diversity doesn't divide us. What divides us is sin. As Catholics, we belong to the world's first truly globalized institution. Our church is a universal church that embraces men and women of every race and nation. Since all are children of the one Father, all are brothers and sisters to one another. Our unity is not founded on race or language or nation of origin, but on Christ. We acknowledge one Lord, one faith, one baptism. And the theme of next year's World Day of Migrants and Refugees, the statement of Pope Francis I quoted from, is simply the Church without frontiers, mother to all. And the diversity of languages and cultures and races within the Catholic Church witnesses to the Catholicity of the gospel message of salvation. It enriches all. Before his return to the Father, Jesus confided to us his great commission to bring the good news to all nations. Now today, the world is increasingly globalized. Goods and merchandise made in one continent are bought and sold in another, half a world away. Information and money can cross borders in an instant. And in a globalized world, people also increasingly move across borders, often in dramatic ways. But as Pope Emeritus Benedict XVI remarked, globalization has made us all neighbors, but it has not made us brothers. And so it has to be the Church of Jesus Christ, a church that is truly Catholic because it brings into its communion people of every race, language, and culture. It has to be the church that must teach the world how to live as brothers and sisters. If we Catholics are to reflect the light of Christ to people, then we must model in the way we live in our families, in our parishes, and our communities, what a reconciled world looks like. Now, part of the globalization we experience today is the fact of migration. And so in the face of this reality, the Church teaches us not to fear the migrant. And the Church warns us not to mistreat the migrant. Yesterday's first reading at Mass. In a way, just as we call Jesus the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords, we can also refer to him as the migrant of migrants. And becoming a man like us, he migrated from heaven. He became a citizen of our world so that we in turn might become citizens of the world to come. And those who will enter into his heavenly homeland will do so because, as he himself will tell us, I was a stranger and you welcomed me. The same Jesus, you will remember, was a refugee child. Joseph had to take Mary and the child Jesus and depart in haste because of King Herod, who wished to destroy that child. And you can be assured that Joseph did not waste any time trying to get a visa to cross over into Egypt. So this, is the theological ground why the church will continue to speak out on behalf of migrants everywhere. We will speak out, and we do speak out in defense of those, especially the young, who are trafficked across borders to be exploited in the sex trade. We continue to advocate for a just and equitable reform of a broken immigration system that continues to separate families for unacceptable periods of time and provides no path to citizenship for millions who work in jobs that otherwise would have gone unfilled. We will defend the rights of refugees and asylum seekers for a safe haven from persecution and violence. And while we wait, greatly frustrated, but while we wait for Congress to act and to pass into law fair and just immigration reform, we urge the Obama administration to protect, within the lawful limits of his executive authority, those individuals and families who, though undocumented, have built equities in this country. We want him to protect them from deportation and exploitation. God shows no partiality, nor should we. We cannot remain indifferent to the human suffering caused by our current inadequate and antiquated immigration system. As Pope Francis says, the antidote to the globalization of indifference must be the globalization of charity. Now, the Church recognizes the rights of the state to control its borders. States have sovereignty, and sovereignty means something. But at the same time, the Church acknowledges that the rights of a human being to the conditions of a human life take precedence over the right to border regulation. For example, you can lock your doors to protect your property. But if someone knocks on your door and says, "Let me in because there's a rapist chasing me," your obligation to protect that life supersedes any obligation to protect your property. You got to open your door. And if you're not home, and this poor woman breaks in to find shelter, can you call her a criminal because of that? I think not. And in any case, being here in the United States in an irregular status is not in most cases a crime. It is, to be sure, a violation of civil law, but it's not a criminal felony. For example, when you make that illegal U-turn or run that stoplight and you get a ticket, that doesn't make you a criminal. You might be guilty of a misdemeanor, you might have to pay a fine, but you won't be uprooted from your family or detained indefinitely. But undocumented immigrants are oftentimes. And truth be told, our current system, instead of discouraging undocumented migration, makes it inevitable, because adequate provisions in law do not exist to match up willing workers from other countries with unfilled jobs here. Those who survive the gauntlet of a dangerous border crossing do find work in short order. And when there's no work, they don't come. Illegal entry across the U.S. border dropped in 2009, 2010, 2011, not because there were more border guards there, but because of the recession. Our economy simply needs their manpower. And at the same time, these workers contribute billions to the tax and social security system, oftentimes contributions that they will never be able to claim. These 11 million estimated undocumented living in the United States today are not sleeping under bridges. They've distributed themselves across the country without the benefit of any, centrally run government program. They distributed themselves around the country to go where the jobs are. And so you'll find Mexicans working in Atlanta fixing roofs. You'll find Hondurans milking cows in New Hampshire, and others picking onions upstate New York, etc. People have distributed themselves and go where the jobs are. Family unity visas are also very scarce. For example, waiting times can be as long as 10 years for a Mexican family to be reunited with a relative in the U.S., even when that relative here is a legal U.S. resident or U.S. citizen. He has to wait 10 years to bring that person, his relative, here. And that's one reason why we see these dramatic cases of women and children trying to cross the border, and oftentimes dying in the back of trucks, etc., because people desperate to reunite themselves with loved ones here in this country do desperate things and dangerous things. Many of those kids that crossed the border from Central America, that was a big news story in August, and they're still coming in slower numbers, but many of those kids come because they're trying to reunite with family members already here in the United States. I have a shelter in Miami run by Catholic Charities that over the past 14 months have seen about almost 500 kids. And right now it holds about 75 kids. And these kids are processed out and sent to, in most cases, to relatives living here in this country. And when you look at the conditions in their countries of origin, the situation in Honduras and El Salvador, a metaphor would be to say that, these children and their mothers look a lot like people running out of a house that's on fire. And our response should not be to lock them in the burning house. So we need immigration reform. We need legislation that has three major components, like a three-legged stool. And this is what the U.S. bishops have been saying for over 10 years now. And we have been at the forefront calling for migration reform ever since in 2001 or 2, we issued a pastoral statement, pastoral letter that was signed by both the bishops of the United States and the bishops of Mexico called Strangers No Longer. First, any new proposal should feature means for undocumented long-term residents to access permanent residency. Legalization doesn't have to mean necessarily amnesty. It can be conditioned on any number of criteria, including, for example, sweat equity that people have already accrued through their work in the U.S. And such a legal remedy would both stabilize immigrant families and the labor force. Second, it should reform the employment-based legal immigration system in a way that increases legal avenues to work while protecting the rights of both foreign-born and U.S. workers. This would permit future flows of workers to enter safely and legally and reduce deaths at the border. The big agribusiness in this country need workers, and their margins are very slim. And if we don't have a legal means for them to have workers, and at the same time we are making it difficult for the illegal workers to live here and survive, then the ag jobs are going to go across the border just like a lot of the manufacturing jobs did as well. And the third part of this plan should be shortening the waiting times under the family unification system. Immigration policy in the U.S. has always had as a top priority the unification of families. And too often, our current system separates husbands from wives, parents from children, and that's a morally unacceptable outcome in a nation built upon the strength of the family. Now, as I said, this is what we proposed in our pastoral letter, Strangers No Longer, over a decade ago. And actually, it was essentially the bill advanced by Senators Kane and Kennedy about 10 years ago. Our staff helped their staff write the bill, but it didn't work. A lot of things conspired to make that bill not work. 9/11, and President Bush, who supported it, lost a lot of political coinage by the Iraq War, etc., and he could not get it passed. Subsequent bills, like the Martinez-Hagel bill, have not been as good, but we keep trying, we keep looking for some relief, because the pain that our broken system inflicts on millions here in the U.S., including millions who are U.S. citizens but see their loved ones, a parent or a sibling, being torn away from them and deported, that pain requires some action. President Obama, in the past 6 years, has deported more people than have been deported in the last 15 years, in 6 years. And really, when you look at these immigrants, people say that they're lawbreakers, but I think it's more accurate to say that they're not breaking the law as much as the law is breaking them. Anti-immigrant polemicists ignore the human tragedy and the family dislocation enabled by the status quo, while discounting the invaluable contributions immigrants make to our nation. They say that they don't like illegal immigration, but by stopping any legislation, they just continue the status quo. 11 million people here without documentation, without legal status. Americans, however, are as a whole fair-minded people. Polls indicate that the majority of Americans want a comprehensive immigration reform. And we really cannot continue to accept the benefits of undocumented laborers, but be unwilling to extend to them the protection of the law. And so what we're really doing right now is we're creating a new underclass. People that are without rights, without legal protection, people that are subject to exploitation. And the last time we did that, it was called Jim Crow. And our nation has not yet recovered fully from the evil consequences of Jim Crow. Now, to those who accused Jesus of breaking the laws of his day, he replied, "The Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath." So this teaching of Jesus underscores the point that positive law, even divine positive law, is meant to benefit, not to enslave mankind. The Patriots, the Boston Patriots, who broke the law by tossing tea into Boston Harbor, understood this, as did Rosa Parks, who broke the law by refusing to give up her bus seat to a white man. When laws fail to advance the common good, they can and they should be changed. And when they're not, we have just contempt for these unjust laws. That spreads over to generalized contempt to all laws. our immigration laws need to be changed. They are antiquated and inadequate for the promotion and regulation of social and economic relations of 21st century America. And I think everybody is agreed on that, even the anti-immigrant people. But the solutions proposed should not make the situation worse. Outdated laws, ill-adapted to the increasing interdependence of our world and the globalization of labor, are bad laws. However, proposed changes must take into account both human dignity and national interest. Otherwise, bad laws will be replaced by worse ones. And this is why the U.S. bishops, with a broad coalition, a bipartisan coalition that ranges from unions to chambers of commerce, have supported broad, comprehensive immigration reform that, while addressing future needs for labor by providing for a legal guest worker program, also offers an earned path to legalization for those 10 million or so workers already, or 11 million workers already in the country, as well as fixing the unacceptable backlogs for family unification visas that keep families separated for intolerable lengths of time. A narrow, restrictive legislation focusing solely on enforcement will only make matters worse. $1 billion has been spent in the last 10 years on border enforcement, and yet illegal immigration has increased when the labor market has demanded it. Enforcement really has led to more illegal migration, not less, because when it became harder to go back home, when the border became increasingly militarized, many of these migrant workers from Mexico that would go up to Seattle and that area to pick apples, well, when it became so hard for them to go home, they stayed put. And then they didn't have a vocation to celibacy, so they wanted their wives to come and join them, and then their children. And so, border control brought more immigration and not less. It's counterintuitive, but it's true. Now, illegal immigration should not be tolerated. I'm not saying that we should have illegal immigration, because it leads to abuse and exploitation of the migrants themselves, and ultimately the businesses that rely on their labor and help fuel the growth of the American economy would prefer and would benefit from a reliable and legal workforce. But fixing illegal immigration does not require the demonization of the so-called illegals. America has always been a land of promise and opportunity for those willing to work hard. We can provide for our national security and secure borders without making America, a nation of immigrants, less a land of promise or opportunity for immigrants. The Second Vatican Council, 50 years ago, spoke about how the human person, the human being, realizes himself or herself only through a sincere gift of oneself. And that is a great theological insight. It's the theology of the gift that we have to give of ourselves. And that theology of the gift really is made real in the lives of the migrants themselves. Billions of dollars are sent home in remittances by people who have sacrificed by leaving what was comfortable, what was secure, and coming to the United States and working to support loved ones far away. A theology of the gift. Victor Hugo's 19th century novel, Les Miserables, which we've seen in various renditions on Broadway and a movie of Les Mis. But that novel tells how pride and neglect of mercy, represented in the bitterly zealous legalism of Inspector Javert, ultimately destroys him. Today, modern-day Javerts on radio and TV talk shows, fan flames of resentment against supposed lawbreakers, equating them with terrorists intent on hurting us. And yet these people only ask for the opportunity to become legal. They can't go and stand in line because there is no line for them to stand into. They want to become legal. They want to come out of the shadows where they live in fear, the fear of a knock on their door in the dead of night, or an immigration raid to their workplace. Like Jean Valjean, the hero of Les Miserables, today's migrants only look for the opportunity to redeem themselves through honest work. Today, anytime a bishop is on the news or writes an op-ed, he gets beat up for one thing or the other, and they like to take umbrage at us for any number of things, and they really take umbrage at our advocacy on behalf of these quote-unquote illegals. Anytime an op-ed that I write for the Miami Herald or the Sun Sentinel or some other newspaper, you read those comments on the bottom, and I get called everything, imaginable. And, every bad thing that happened in Boston is thrown on me in those comments as well. But, people, criticize us, but I think we stand in a proud tradition. Like the novel's benevolent Bishop Myriel, who gave his candlesticks to the desperate Jean Valjean and protected him from arrest by Javert. And this is why we continue to call on the legislative branch of our government to seize the opportunity for a comprehensive fix to our broken immigration system. A nation that honors lawbreakers, like the patriots of the Boston Tea Party, a nation that can allow the dignified defiance of Rosa Parks and her act of lawbreaking to touch its conscience, is a nation that can also make room for modern-day Jean Valjeans. We can be a nation of laws without becoming a nation of Javerts. As Jesus reminded the embittered zealots of his day, laws are designed for the benefit, not the harm of humankind. It all depends on who we're going to listen to. Do we listen to Bill O'Reilly, Rush Limbaugh, Sean Hannity, or Glenn Beck? Or do we listen to Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John? Thank you.